Well, in the latest of your free agency news for your 2019 Minnesota Vikings, the Vikings continue to add onto their offensive line by re-signing Brett Jones, center. He can pretty much interchange between guard and the center positions. Brett Jones re-signed him to a one-year deal worth up to $1.5 million. This is Realistic Randy, Mediokr Best Sports Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast that you're watching on YouTube right now is powered by Score North. Now, on the surface level, I do like this signing. I like Brett Jones. I think he has some good potential with this team. I like to know the motivation behind the signing of this. So, for instance, surface level, it looks really good. In theory, this is a good signing, and for $1.5 million, not bad. But if you remember last year, right before the season started, the Vikings, they traded for Brett Jones with the New York Giants. I forgot what draft pick they gave up for him. But anyway, they traded for Brett Jones from the New York Giants. And this was an insurance policy for Pat Elflein, who started training camp last offseason on the PUP list, missed all of preseason and missed week 1 before returning to week 2. Okay, fine. That's understandable. The confusion after that was the usage or lack of usage of Brett Jones after his, 3 starts that he had in 2018. And it's crazy because, the ultimate evaluation, at least for me personally, the ultimate evaluation for offensive line play is, how I say about Anthony Barr, and I'm not here to go on this Anthony Barr rant or anything like that. It's just purely an example. What I say about Anthony Barr is there's too many times you don't see him, you don't notice him. At his position, at linebacker or at wide receiver or safety, cornerback, you want to actively see them on your screen. You want to see them making plays actively. It's kind of the opposite with offensive linemen, where it's like you don't want to hear about them at all, right? The only times that offensive linemen that you want to hear their names called if you're a fan, and I feel like this rarely happens. Sometimes you see this, but this rarely happens. The only times that you want to see offensive linemen called if you're a fan of that particular team is the color commentator. They say, hey, look at this great block on this great edge rusher or this great interior defensive lineman. Look how they did. Look at the technique. That's all you want to hear. It's very rare that you see that. More so, if you're going to hear an offensive lineman's name called, it's because of a bonehead penalty or them getting beat for a TFL or a sack. Okay, so with Brett Jones, for the snaps that he played in the 3 starts, I can't remember, honest to God, I can't remember one time where I sat there and said, come on, Brett Jones, are you serious? What are you doing, man? Not one time, okay? And it's crazy because after that, Pat Elflein came back. Okay, fine, he's not taking his spot. But then you got Tom Compton and Mike Remmers, where it's like, at least with Tom Compton, I know he was a disaster last year, but at least there were a couple of games where he wasn't all that bad. Mike Remmers, from start to finish, granted he got signed in 2017 as a tackle. He got moved to a position that he shouldn't have been playing at all. But if we're going based on the position that he played in 2018, from start to finish, Mike Remmers was bad the whole way through. So it's just interesting because, and when you look at the snap counts, for instance, right, the 2018 Minnesota Vikings snap count. Now, this is according to Pro Football Reference. Now, Brett Jones played a total snap count of 191 snaps. You compare that to Danny Isidora. My goodness, Danny Isidora, he played 214 snaps. Tom Compton, 837, and Mike Remmers, 1,048. That's crazy, man. Whereas you go back to Brett Jones, again, 191. That's ridiculous, man. You can't allow that to happen. You can't allow that to happen at all. And what's interesting is because when it comes to the salary that Brett Jones is getting, $1.5 million, is not a guarantee that he's going to start, okay? Now, he may be in the mix to compete for a starting job, and I'm not opposed to that whatsoever, assuming that you draft an offensive lineman in the first round. I think this pretty much solidifies the Vikings going away from offensive line in the first round. I could be wrong. I will still go after it because, if nothing else, for depth, I would still go after offensive linemen in the first round, unless you feel like you can still get an equal quality offensive line pick in the second or third round, because much like last year, maybe it could have been okay, but Mike Remmers would have been a disaster no matter what. But when Nick Easton went down, it really went bad after that, to where it's just like, if you have someone that can fill in, much like a Brian O'Neill who stepped in for, Rashad Hill at right tackle, okay, that's fine. You at least have some depth. I'm hoping that this isn't another patchwork type of job, but $1.5 million is not a guarantee that he'll start. I'm kind of fearful that maybe this could be like last year with Brett Jones or like George Iloka last year as well, whereas you bring him in, there's some potential there, but you don't really give him much of an opportunity. Now, with George Iloka, there was Anthony Harris there. That's fine. But with Brett Jones, it's like, bro, he could step in and replace Tom Compton. He could certainly step in and replace Mike Remmers. You compare that to Josh Klein and his contract. He's getting paid 3 years, $15.5 million, an average salary of just over $5 million. You're not paying a backup that amount of money. So I think, honestly, right now, let's say if Brett Jones is a starting guard, your starting offensive line, what it would look like right now, assuming the Vikings data don't go after any quality starting offensive line in the draft, you've got Riley Reiff at left tackle, Brett Jones at left guard, Pat Elflein at center, Josh Klein at right guard, and then Brian O'Neill at right tackle. I can't contradict myself because I've always said if you have an average offensive line, this team could do really, really good. With Gary Kubiak and Dennison, I believe the offensive line coach, maybe they could do some really good stuff with Josh Klein, have a turnaround, maybe a 180 performance compared to his last year in Tennessee. And with Brett Jones, I'm telling you, I can't remember a time where I was like, yo, Brett Jones, this dude is some trash. I can't remember that. So at least there's 2 bits of optimism there. So, okay, maybe this offensive line could be fine. But I'm just a little bit weary of that because, again, the salary that Brett Jones is getting, and it's crazy because it's like the Vikings. The way that they prioritize putting players on the field, for instance, all right, my wife and I, we live in the Bay Area. We live not too far from wine country, okay? Not too far, about an hour south of Napa Valley. So we're wine enthusiasts. We love wine. And for any people that's like, I bet you do like wine. You damn right I like wine. Why? Because it's delicious, damn it. But anyway, we go after wine, and we'll try wines every other wine. You basically out in this area of NorCal, Northern California, you can just throw a rock, and it will land in a winery, and then it will ricochet off the ground, bounce up, and then land in another winery right next door. So there's wineries all over the place. But anyway, we'll try different wine bottles at different wineries, and they're not cheap at all. They're like 30, sometimes 35 or 40 bucks. And once in a while, for the most part, they're good. But once in a while, we come across just some nasty-ass wine where it's like, oh, my God, this is gross. Now, my wife, she'll take the first sip, and if it's gross and if it's nasty, she'll be like, I don't want any more. Let's just dump it in the sink. And I'm like, are you nuts? Even if it's gross, I'm going to drink that nasty-ass wine until the last drip is left out of that bottle, okay? Why? Because we spent $30, $35 on that bottle of wine. You don't want to just waste it. I will chug on through like a trooper. And that brings me to the point of the Minnesota Vikings. It's like they prioritize investment, the amount of investments they've made on a player versus the actual production that's on the field. Mike Remmers, for instance, right? Brett Jones could have stepped in and easily filled in for Mike Remmers. Mike Remmers, unfortunately, last year, he made $4 million. He made $4 million last year. And so this is all speculation. I mean, I don't see any other reason for them not to bench Mike Remmers other than the salary that he's made. And in recent history, this has been the pattern of the Vikings. So Mike Remmers, he made $4 million. You're not going to bench him because, damn it, we're paying him $4 million. Okay, fine. Okay, Laquan Treadwell getting playing time, significant playing time over Jarius Wright. Why? Because we invested a first-round draft pick into Laquan Treadwell. Or Matt Khalil. Matt Khalil, we invested a first-round draft pick into him. So we certainly can't start. What other replacements did they have? I don't know. What's the mascot of the Vikings? Victor the Viking. Okay, you could play him at left tackle. Or hell, you could put me at left tackle. And make no mistake about it, I would get steamrolled. Me and Victor the Viking, we would get steamrolled if we were to play left tackle, damn it, just like Matt Khalil did. But the difference is we would have done it at a fraction of the price. And then that way you could use those additional funds to go after other players that can make your team better, okay? The point that I'm getting at is I'm not confident. I think there's a little bit of reason to have optimism for this signing because I think he could be a really good player, but I don't know. We've just seen this time and time again where it's just like even if a player doesn't warrant, I guess, playing time on the field, the Vikings will still do it. Why? Because we invested all this money. So anyway, we'll see how that works out. Moving forward from that, I think, what do you guys think about this offensive line, man? Let us know in the comments section of this podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at realistic_Randy. This podcast is on Score North. My Saturdays podcast, you can search YouTube, just my name, Realistic Randy. Facebook at Realistic Randy. We will see you on Saturday.